Welcome back, friends. This is the second part of our ongoing lesson on William Shakespeare's play, The Tragedy of Macbeth. If you haven't watched the previous video, then you should definitely watch it, since we have already covered a lot of areas regarding Macbeth in it. Anyway, coming to today's video, I won't go into general facts, plot and character analysis as we have already covered it. Today, we will talk exclusively on the witches in the tragedy of Macbeth, or as Macbeth refers to them, the weird sisters. The three witches are actually not original creations of Shakespeare. In fact, they were part of the Greek and Roman mythology. According to the mythologies, the three witches are supernatural beings who know one's fate or destiny and could control it. In Roman mythology, they are called the three fata, the root word being fatum, meaning a prophetic utterance. People also suggest associations with several other classical mythological figures, including the three Furies. The Furies were fierce and ruthless goddesses who avenged crimes by pursuing the perpetrators to drive them mad. So the witches or weird sisters, or whatever you may call them, might be interpreted as Furies seeking revenge for Macbeth's victims. I hope you remember the battles I talked about in the first episode. Some readers may also claim that the three witches are not real, that they are just fragments of Macbeth's imagination. But the witches speak to Banquo, and there are scenes where the witches speak in absence of Macbeth, so that claim can be easily put aside. However, one intrinsic problem with the witches is that they are not clearly described in the play. Thus, they seem more mysterious. Even though they do not directly participate in the plot, they do influence Macbeth. It was only after their prophecies that Macbeth thinks of killing Duncan, and it is noteworthy how he doesn't wait to get the throne. He puts in action for that. He kills the king. One may even claim that Macbeth wouldn't have killed Duncan if he wasn't made to believe that he would be the next king by the witches. But the question is, were they really prophecies? King Duncan, if you remember from the play, already decided that Macbeth would become the Thane of Cawdor even before the witches told Macbeth about it. See, no prophecy there. Indeed, the prophecy that Macbeth would become the king did come true, but as I already mentioned, Macbeth worked for it. He wasn't given the throne, for Malcolm was supposed to be the new king, but Macbeth took it, so it wasn't much of a prophecy. In layman's words, the witches instigated Macbeth into the mess that would eventually end with his death. And do you remember the apparitions? An armed head, bloody child, and a child crowned with a tree in head. But they were not prophecies. The witches, if you see closely, were playing with Macbeth's thoughts. They were actually confusing Macbeth. The witches knew that the power-lusty, ambitious Macbeth, who even killed the king and General Banquo, would without a second thought do anything to do away with any threat to his throne. Just like when Macbeth had to kill Fleance, Macbeth also wanted Banquo dead, even after the so-called prophecy claiming that Banquo would never become a king. In the same fashion, the witches knew that the tyrannical Macbeth would kill all of Macduff's family if Macduff was posed as a threat. And interestingly, when the witches told Macbeth about Macduff, he was in England helping Malcolm raise an army. The news of his family's execution would easily have motivated Macduff enough to kill Macbeth. And it wasn't impossible either, since Malcolm's army had the support of the nobles. Macbeth would have lost anyway, and it wasn't impossible for the witches to know that Macduff was untimely ripped from his mother's womb. They are supernatural beings after all. But one point we all can agree on is that the witches worked against the peace of the kingdom. They played the role of conspirators against the crown. Since they themselves cannot go and kill the king, they played with Macbeth's mind and disrupted the peace in the kingdom. We can connect it with the gunpowder plot I talked about in the last video. Even though we can do a feminist reading of the three witches, I think it's not essential for your exams, but you can definitely think about it for your seminars this semester, both by doing a study on Lady Macbeth and the witches. Added to that, if you want to know what people thought of witches back then, we can easily know that by reading Act 1, Scene 3, where the first witch is telling the other witches about how she was insulted by a sailor's wife and how she will in different ways take revenge by depriving him, the sailor of sleep, toss the sailor's ship and will make it hard for him to find a safe harbor. People of that time actually believed that witches could cause illness, death and disaster, and were thought to punish their enemies by giving them nightmares, making their crops fail and their animals sicken. Even the kings couldn't take their minds off it. Remember the book I told you about in the last video? You should also take note of how the witches speak in verse, but it is a form of verse which is very different from that which is used by most of Shakespeare's characters. Many of the lines are in rhyming couplets, in contrast to the unrhymed verse used elsewhere in the play. It's also worth noting that the witch's speech is full of numbers. For instance, the first witch makes the sailor's torture last 7 nights, 9 times 9. A 7 night was a week, 7 nights, so the sailor will suffer for 81 weeks. So I hope this class was helpful. If it was, then do share with your friends. In the next second semester online class, we will talk about Dr. Faustus. Until then, if you have any doubts or any suggestions, do leave them in the comment section. Thank you.